Tessa had been drifting away for weeks, maybe months, but it was only recently that Jonah began to truly feel it. She still smiled at him, still curled her fingers around his arm in public, still posted the occasional dinner with my love story online, but there was a hollowness to it all, like the echo of something that had already died. Her eyes no longer met his when they talked, and her kisses came slower, colder, more like habit than affection. The changes were subtle at first. Her laughter while texting late into the night, the shift in her perfume, a new lock screen on her phone she tilted just slightly away from him. He told himself not to overthink. That was always his weakness. He liked patterns, details, meaning. She liked spontaneity and, lately, distance. That Thursday night, Jonah asked her gently, almost hesitantly, "Is something wrong?" Tessa looked up from her phone, flashed that disarming, sugary smile she'd perfected long before she met him, and replied, "You're just overthinking again." Then she leaned in, kissed him quickly, too quickly, and disappeared into the bedroom. A few minutes later, she was slipping into a dress he hadn't seen before. It shimmered like it was made to be seen under other people's eyes. "Going out?" he asked, still seated at the kitchen table. She adjusted an earring. "Just drinks with the girls. I'll be back late." And just like that, she was gone. Jonah didn't text to check on her. He didn't ask who she was really with. He didn't scroll through old messages or look for signs in her social feeds. He simply turned his phone to silent and placed it face down on the counter. Then he got up, moved through their shared apartment, and stood in the center of the bedroom they'd once decorated together. The silence in the space was suffocating. It felt too neat, too curated. He opened their closet, stared at the mix of her bright chaos and his order, and felt something settle inside him. He would not scream, he would not cry, he would not confront her. That night, Jonah didn't just go quiet. He made a decision, a clean surgical cut, the beginning of an end, and the first moment of peace he'd felt in months. The next morning, Jonah woke up alone. Tessa hadn't returned during the night, or if she hadn't slept beside him. Her side of the bed remained untouched, the sheets still perfectly smooth. The soft indent of his own body on the mattress seemed too loud in contrast, like evidence of something he wasn't willing to admit out loud yet. He moved through the apartment in silence, not out of passive aggression, but because noise felt unnecessary. The sound of his bare feet on the hardwood, the quiet hiss of the kettle boiling water for his coffee, these became his only company. He didn't call her, he didn't leave a note. Instead, he made himself breakfast, plated it carefully, and ate while staring at the door she hadn't come through. When his phone lit up, it wasn't a message from Tessa, but her social media feed updating without her knowing. Jonah didn't need to scroll, her story was already at the top. The glow of the screen illuminated her face, laughing, tilting her head back under dim bar lighting, a man's arm draped across her waist. Not a friend, not one of the girls, someone else. He stared at the image for a moment longer than necessary, not because he didn't believe it, but because it confirmed what his instincts had already whispered weeks ago. He tapped the screen once, held it, and quietly removed her from his following list. He didn't text her, he didn't ask who the man was, he didn't ask why. Instead, he opened his photo gallery. There were hundreds of images, vacations, quiet Sundays, messy dinners, candid laughs, love once caught on digital film. Without hesitation, he selected them all. He pressed delete. No folder, no backup, not even a second glance. Next came the messages. He scrolled through their entire history, scanning words he once reread to feel close to her. The emojis, the I miss you, the apologies, the late-night check-ins, all of it dissolved in a few clicks. His phone, once filled with her voice and digital fingerprints, was now unnervingly still. She'd become just a contact. Then not even that. Jonah went further. He blocked her on every platform: WhatsApp, Instagram, email, even Spotify, where they had shared playlists. It was precise, methodical, not in anger, but in clarity. Every click, every swipe, every block was not a cry for attention. It was a ritual of detachment, an exorcism without theatrics. By noon, the apartment was a different place. The framed photo on the hallway table, gone. Her robe on the bathroom hook, folded and set aside, the toothbrush thrown out. The candle she loved lighting after dinner, extinguished, cold wax hardened. She hadn't even noticed. Later that day, when her name appeared on his screen from a number he didn't recognize, he didn't flinch. She had likely realized she'd been blocked. The message was short. "Hey, can we talk?" He read it. He didn't open it. Didn't respond, just swiped left. Archive! For most people, silence feels like weakness, like cowardice. But Jonah had never been more certain. Words were Tessa's weapon. Tears, confusion, charm, and nostalgia. She had mastered the art of pulling people back in, with fragments of affection and promises of change. But Jonah had seen the whole picture. He no longer needed an apology or a confession. He already had the truth. She thought silence was empty. She was wrong. Silence is full of choice, full of control. And for Jonah, it had finally become his freedom. Jonah didn't rush anything. This wasn't some impulsive act of heartbreak. It was a process, like renovating a home that had quietly rotted from the inside. One room at a time, one drawer at a time, one memory at a time. That Sunday morning, while the city outside buzzed with weekend life, Jonah was conducting a quiet purge. He started in the bathroom. The little things went first. Her rose gold hairbrush with strands still tangled in its bristles. The lavender bath salts she always used on Fridays. The half-empty bottle of expensive serum that she claimed was too rare to waste. He lined them up, wiped each bottle down, and dropped them methodically into a trash bag. No drama, just disposal. The scent of her began to fade, replaced by the sterile neutrality of unscented soap. The bedroom came next. Her side of the closet was like a museum, curated, color-coded, lined with stories he no longer needed to tell himself. Dresses she hadn't worn in months, heels she once joked made her feel invincible, coats that carried the smell of nights out that didn't include him. Jonah folded each item with precision. He didn't tear anything. He didn't smash her perfume bottles or cut up old clothes like some wounded man in a movie. That wasn't him, that wasn't this. He placed her things into boxes, sealed them with quiet tape, and stacked them by the door. She wouldn't need to return for them. He already planned to send them away, to her sister perhaps, or to a storage unit with a code she could use if she still wanted them. He didn't care where they ended up. They just didn't belong here anymore. Next was the kitchen. Her favorite wine glass, crystal, tall, thin-stemmed. Shattered in the sink, not out of spite, but because his grip slipped. He stood over the shards for a long time, listening to the sound of his own breath. He didn't curse, didn't sigh, just swept the pieces into a dustpan and dropped them into the bin. One more thing erased. The last thing he did was change the Wi-Fi password. It was symbolic more than necessary. She didn't live here anymore, even if she hadn't yet realized it. He renamed the network Clean Slate. Fitting, he thought. Later that evening, Jonah sat on the couch, not their couch anymore, scrolling through his phone. Not aimlessly, purposefully. He changed every password, bank, streaming services, utility accounts. She wouldn't be able to log in anymore, not even by accident. He removed her fingerprint from the door lock, removed her face from Face ID. His digital life, once intertwined with hers, was now wholly his own. He wasn't being cruel. He was being final. Then, without warning, a new message came through. A different number. Likely another one of her backups. This one didn't say, "Can we talk?" This one said, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer. Instead, he blocked the number. Again. There was no point in responding. Anything he said would only open a door. And Jonah wasn't just closing doors now. He was locking them, boarding them up and throwing away the keys. He had nothing to prove. She would never hear his side of the story. That was the real punishment. Not anger, not cruelty, but absence. A complete vacuum where she used to have influence. He sat in silence as the sky outside shifted into dusk. The apartment was cleaner now, sparsely decorated. There was a peace in that, a clarity. Tessa had always needed attention, likes, comments, hearts, hands around her waist. She lived in noise, needed it to feel seen, but Jonah had always existed differently. He didn't speak much, he listened, he watched, he processed. And when he finally made decisions, he made them with quiet conviction. He picked up his phone one last time that night. He stared at the blank home screen. No missed calls, no unread texts. It was serene, not empty, just finally still. Tessa noticed the silence before she realized it was permanent. At first she assumed it was one of Jonah's moods. He had always been quiet, methodical in how he expressed things, never reactive. A man of pauses and long silences, the kind that either said everything or nothing at all. She had always found that comforting, even charming in the beginning, but now it irritated her. It made her feel small. When her messages went unread, she rolled her eyes and told herself he was being dramatic. A little wounded, maybe. She would let him have his moment. He would come around. He always did. Jonah was the kind of man who forgave even when he shouldn't, who waited even when he was hurting. But this time, he didn't wait. He didn't respond. He didn't call, and when she checked, she found herself blocked. Everywhere. She blinked at the screen like it had glitched. She refreshed, closed the app, reopened it. Still blocked. She tried another platform. Nothing. Her username wasn't even recognized. It was as if she'd never existed. Panic didn't set in right away. It came slowly, creeping in like a cold draft under a locked door. She tried calling, but the line rang once before falling silent, straight to voicemail. She tried again using a second number, then a third. No ring, no click, just nothing. She messaged from a backup account. "Hey, can we talk?" No reply. She tried guilt next. "Jonah, please. We need to talk about this." Still nothing. She tried anger. "Are you seriously doing this? After everything?" Silence. She went to their mutual friends, asked casually at first, played the concerned girlfriend. "Jonah's been acting weird. Have you heard from him?" Most of them just shrugged. A few said he'd been taking space. One mentioned he might have moved, but couldn't say where. He'd vanished. Not loudly, not in a storm of accusations or slammed doors. He just erased her. She opened their shared photo album in the cloud. Gone. Deleted. She opened his Instagram account. Gone. Or maybe blocked, she wasn't sure anymore. It was hard to tell the difference when you were the one shut out. Tessa wasn't used to this kind of powerlessness. She was the one people returned to, the one who always had the last word or the last kiss or the final message that turned the page her way. She was unforgettable. That was her secret. She lingered in people's minds long after she'd moved on. But Jonah wasn't lingering. He had disappeared in a way that was surgical, clean, brutal in its efficiency. No drama, no breakdown, just absence. For the first time in their relationship, she felt small, unseen. She paced her apartment, hoping she'd missed something, some signal that he was bluffing. But the signs weren't there. There were no signs at all. And that was the worst part. Even anger would have meant he still cared. But this was different. This was peace. She imagined him, wherever he was, living simply, quietly, with a clean home screen and no missed messages, with no memory of her perfume or her laugh, or the way she used to pull him into bed with cold feet and warm hands. He had taken back his silence and made it into a wall, not a fortress built to keep her out, but a garden that didn't need her. Tessa stared at her phone for hours that night, watching the typing bubble that never appeared. She wrote message after message and deleted them all before sending. She tried to tell herself he was overreacting. She tried to believe he would come back once he'd cooled off. But in the pit of her stomach, she knew he was already gone. And for a woman who had spent her life manipulating emotion, drawing people close only to discard them when the moment passed, nothing terrified her more than being discarded with no chance to respond. He hadn't just walked away. He had turned her into silence. And there is no arguing with silence. The train had been moving for over 4 hours when Jonah finally looked up from the window. The landscape outside had shifted from gray city blocks to open, unfamiliar terrain. Trees blurred past like passing thoughts. Mountains loomed in the distance, clean and distant. For the first time in months, he wasn't measuring time in unread messages or delayed responses. There was no waiting now, only arriving. The station he stepped into smelled of cedar and fresh coffee. It wasn't grand or particularly remarkable, but it was new. That was enough. He moved through the crowd quietly, his only luggage a carry-on and a backpack that fit comfortably on his shoulders. He had left everything else behind, literally and figuratively. The apartment he'd rented was small, efficient, and high up. It wasn't furnished yet, aside from a mattress on the floor and a single chair by the window. The walls were bare, and Jonah liked it that way. It felt honest. For too long he had lived surrounded by curated comfort, books arranged by color, framed photos of moments that now felt scripted. The illusion of shared harmony. Here there were no echoes of someone else's preferences, no scent of another's shampoo clinging to towels. Just space. Blank and silent. The first morning in his new city he rose before sunrise. The air was still cool as he brewed his coffee slowly, without urgency. He carried the mug to the window, pulled the chair closer, and sat down to watch the light unfold. It started softly, muted blues bleeding into orange. Then the horizon caught fire, and a single golden beam reached through the glass and landed across his face. He closed his eyes and let the warmth settle into him. There were no voices behind him, no texts lighting up his phone, no tension humming beneath the quiet. Just him. He hadn't posted anything about leaving, hadn't made a speech, no final goodbye. People always assumed power came from confrontation, breaking dishes, shouting truths, slamming doors. But Jonah had learned something quieter, something stronger. Power wasn't in what you said, it was in what you refused to say. Tessa had tried everything: messages, calls from fake numbers, even emails with subject lines like "please" and "just one last thing." He had read none of them. He had long since deleted the folders, unsubscribed from the chaos. She was trying to haunt a house that no longer existed, and that was the true revenge. Not his silence, but her irrelevance. He sipped his coffee slowly, listening to nothing but the hum of the city below. People were starting their routines, shops opening, joggers pounding pavement. No one here knew his name, and that anonymity felt like a second skin he was only just learning to enjoy. He thought about what closure meant. People always wanted it in the form of answers, explanations, emotional autopsies. But sometimes the most powerful closure didn't come with words. Sometimes it came with walking away so completely the other person didn't even get a silhouette to chase. Jonah smiled, not wide or dramatic, just enough to feel the tension leave his jaw, not because she was gone. That wasn't the point. He smiled because he realized something deeper. She no longer existed in his world, and in that absence, he had found peace.